Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Scott Norberg. He is the founder and president at Operas Technologies. Welcome, Scott.
All right. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on you and your career thus far?
Yeah. My name is Scott Norberg, currently president of Operas Technologies. Started off as a software developer back in 2006, a self-taught software developer. I did software development for a couple of years, gradually drifted into security, have done a variety of roles. I've been a manager, been programmer, appsec engineer, consultant, and been doing security pretty much full time since 2017, and I've been running Opera since 2022.
Very cool. So how's life as an entrepreneur versus what you were doing previously?
It's everything that you hear it is, and everything that people that say that starting a business, Elon Musk says is like chewing glass. I don't know that it's quite like chewing glass, but it is very difficult because when you're in a company, you can focus on the things that you're good at. And when you're a solopreneur, you can't just outsource things like, say, sales or marketing or anything that you don't do or don't want to do. It's all on you for better and for worse.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. In the beginning, it takes a lot of figuring out how you handle all those different departmental functions that typically you'd have in a larger organization. And like you said, it distracts from what you're good at. So my experience has been best practice for me has just been outsource that as soon as you possibly can to people that do that for a living, and they're going to be much better at it than you. You just need to, I guess, have some revenue coming in the door. Are there any lessons that you've learned as an entrepreneur that you think, and I know this wasn't something we had kind of talked about previously, but are there any lessons that you've learned as an entrepreneur that you think might be able to be applied to larger organizations, for instance, that are looking to hire?
For looking to hire, I'm not sure. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned is marketing is really important. It really needs to come first, because if you're building a product or trying to sell a service and you don't have a market for it, then you're going to have a hard time taking the business off the ground. And I would say that the same thing is going to be true if you're running a security department. You're still trying to push a narrative, push a new process to people. And if the people that you're talking to aren't believing in what you're selling, you're going to have a hard time selling it. So making sure that people believe in what you're selling, are on board, are interested in what you're offering, I think is necessary for success for anyone, regardless if you're an entrepreneur or if you're running a department.
For sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of folks in security don't necessarily realize or think that there's an element of selling to their job. They think, there's this thing, I need to secure it. That's the job. But, in reality, I think especially for security leaders, they really need to be effective or they're going to struggle. They need to be effective in building a business case for the initiatives that they want to take on, or for the budget that they need, or the headcount that they need. And being able to sell that vision to, the members of the board or executives is hard to develop, but very valuable skill. So yeah, the ability to sell and market is important. And same thing when it goes, I guess, for recruiting too. I think a lot of people view recruiting as like an HR function, when in reality, I think it's more of a sales and marketing function. I mean, you're essentially marketing to would-be employees what's great about your company, just like you would to potential customers. And you really have to weave a story, I think, to be effective in doing that. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the talent gap overall? Would you say it's a real thing? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I do think it's a real thing. I think it's complicated because as we've talked about on LinkedIn, there are, and as I've had conversations with other people on LinkedIn, there are a lot of people out there who are looking for jobs. A lot of people who are knowledgeable about security looking for jobs. It's not just an entry level person looking for jobs, and I believe we'll talk about that later on. But people with years of experience in security who are looking for jobs, and there are openings right now. Lot more openings than there were in 2020, end of 2022, beginning in 2023. There are a lot of openings. The challenge that I see is that companies are looking for unicorn talent, are looking for employees who have a whole laundry list of skills and are hiring at 2015, 2016 prices because, hey, we have all this talent in the market. Let's try to take advantage of that. And I think there are a lot of people out there who just either don't want the jobs or they just don't qualify because they don't have the whole laundry list of requirements. So just what might be a little bit of a tangent, when I was hiring at my last full-time company, a company called Gallagher, we needed folks who had experience with DAST scanning, and I really wanted people with software development experience to be able to explain to software developers what the scanner was finding. And I knew that finding somebody with both of those was going to be incredibly difficult. So what I did was I said, okay, I need somebody with software development experience and who has security knowledge, and I'm willing to train on DAST scanning. And I don't see that nearly as much. I didn't see it very much or often enough in 2021, 2022, but I'm seeing it even less now. So companies that are looking for talent could probably find talent if they wanted it. But they're asking too much and offering too little.
Yeah, that's the way I see it as well. Basically, we have a giant matching problem where if you look in raw numbers, there's X number of candidates and Y number of jobs. And those are roughly equivalent. You could make the argument that one's lesser than the other, but I think the majority of the people are just not looking for the jobs that are being offered. And there's this perception from the employer side that, look, if it's an employer favorable market as we have right now, and I post up a job and I get 500 applicants in the first week, that means there's plenty of people out there, so we can be as picky as we want. When in reality, if that's a very narrow candidate or small candidate pool or very specific skill set that they're looking for, it could still take them months, if not a year, if they ever fill the position. So, I think there's a lot of mismanaged expectations. People don't realize how few people with certain skill sets actually exist on the market. And then you have to narrow that down to an even smaller number of people that are willing to make a move, because people with these rare skill sets, they don't need to go anywhere because they're one of, only a few people in the USA that have that skill set. So they're likely happily employed. So this posting jobs and using the number of applicants as some sort of gauge of the ability to fill a role with a specific skill set, it's, I think, misguided at best. So I think that's a major problem. And what seems to me to be happening is a lot of people are realizing that there are these rare skill sets. In some cases, that person might not exist. In some cases, the company is combining 3 roles into one. That's how you end up with these crazy job descriptions. But if the company can never fill that role and their salary is too low, what do you do? Like if you have a specific budget, your only options really are to lower your requirements, raise your salary, or I guess the third option these days is outsource it. And I think that's where, going back to our conversation from earlier about outsourcing, that seems to be happening more and more. There's, more people like yourself that are starting their own consulting firms because they realize that companies, they don't have the budget to hire somebody in a full-time permanent role for these niche skill sets. So it may make more sense for them to do it on a fractional basis. Do you think that's kind of what's happening, or am I way off base?
What I'm seeing from other candidates is that there are a lot of people who are not finding the right job and are starting companies because they just can't find the right role. And so, rather than just continue beating their head up against the job market, they're starting a company. For what it's worth, that's not why I started Operas. I actually had an idea for a product, and so I wanted to build a product. But I do see a lot of candidates out there who are starting businesses because they just don't see another option. Another thing that I see from the company side, for the companies that don't ask for the entire laundry list of requirements, is that they're just offering what everybody else is offering. Um, when I 2022, I was lead application security engineer at Gallagher, and I can't tell you how many recruiters reached out to me about just generic application security engineer positions. They all look the same. You might swap out one bullet point for another one or one tool for another one, but they all look the same. They all offered the same salary. And I wasn't really looking at the time, but as a candidate, like, why would I choose this company? And I don't think companies realize how many other jobs out there look exactly like the one that they're offering. And so they're offering the same job, they're offering it at the same salary, and then they're surprised as to why they're not getting enough quality applicants. It's because you're offering what everybody else is offering, and who's ever looking for that type of role, as you mentioned earlier, already has one.
Yeah, and there's long been an issue too. I've found that companies will decide that the only fit for that open role that they have is somebody that's coming from a direct competitor or at least a similar type of company from a similar environment. And yeah, like you said, it ends up all being the same, and it just becomes basically a giant zero-sum game where your new hire is somebody else's backfill, but no new talent is being added to the system in hiring that way. And I think that's a big issue we have with the industry overall. And we'll see what AI does to the whole, if it's going to turn over the whole apple cart or not. But yeah, everything seems to be very samey. How do you think that happens with the job descriptions looking the same, the pay being the same, the titles being the same, and everybody wanting to hire the same people? Any ideas as to how that kind of happens?
I only have guesses. I think a lot of it is that companies hear about certain roles and hear about certain job titles. Oh, that works for us. And then they will fill out a generic job description, have HR do research. What are other companies paying for this? And then, okay, so we have this job description, we have this salary range, and then look for employees. And I really do think that a lot of these companies just think that, oh, I'm proud of my company, therefore other people should be happy to join my company too. And you go to the career sites of a lot of these companies, and oh, our people make the difference. Every single one. And the message is the same. But it's tough to see that sometimes if you're in the thick of things. And you go to a conference and you hear about a new type of job, and so you write that, and you think that, yeah, I'm really proud of my company. I'm really happy here. Other people should be too, but they don't necessarily see it. Even if your company really truly is different, and the people there really truly make that particular company a unique environment to work in. How do you sell that? How do you show that? And getting back to the marketing point, as we talked about at the beginning here, how do you market that? How do you let people know that, yes, this is a position, this is a job, this is a company that people should want to go to?
Yeah, it's I think about weaving a story around your company. You're a storyteller if you're an effective marketer and an effective recruiter as well. So somebody like me, I can talk to a potential new client, ask them a bunch of really deep questions about how they hire, what their philosophy is, what their management style is, what's great about their company in their own words, what their benefit structure looks like. You need to know all of these specifics, and then you really need to know the industry that you're operating in, and possibly even the sub-discipline of security you have to understand really well. I mean, there's just so many different factors that go into weaving a compelling story and understanding your audience well enough to craft that compelling story. And in that respect, I think there's really no substitute for just experience, like deep specialization. That's the only way to do it. You need kind of I think a close relationship between the recruiter that has the specialization and then the hiring manager, the hiring team overall, because the hiring manager's perspective may not be the same as the team's perspective when it comes to what's great about working there. So, I think it's important to get a sense from the whole team, and then have that recruiter put together a message, make sure that message resonates with the team that's hiring as well. And I think a lot of times these steps in the process to effective recruiting are completely skipped because either folks don't know what they're doing, or they're too rushed. There's not enough hours in a day, and everybody's so busy. Have you been in that situation at all, where you were helping, I guess, build that case, or been a part of a hiring team to where you were able to kind of bring in some folks?
Yeah, and I think what makes it tough for a lot of the big consulting firms is a lot of the big consulting firms have one team that speak to the hiring manager, and then a completely different team that look for candidates. And I've run into this both as a candidate and as a hiring manager, where the candidate has questions about the job, about the duties, about something. And then the recruiter that's talking to the candidate has to talk to the recruiter who's talking to the hiring manager in order to try to get those answers. And then they don't have the answer. They'll go to the hiring manager. And so you're just playing this game of telephone. You don't have one person who really gets the whole picture of, here's what the candidates look like, here's what the candidate pool looks like, here's what the hiring manager wants, and how do you meet those needs.
So for that particular skill set, you were open to training somebody on the DAST piece, but they had to have some sort of foundation in programming, from what I remember you saying. How did you determine that person could learn the DAST piece when they didn't necessarily have that experience? Because I think a lot of companies, they'll say, well, they just have to have this experience. That's what the job is. We can't afford to train somebody. We don't have the man hours. So how are you able to build that case for that person?
So having done the position before, I felt that in order to run the DAST scans, you really needed to know how DAST works. But in order to know how DAST works, you need to know how websites work. It's a lot easier to train somebody who knows how websites work on how DAST scanners work than it is to teach somebody who knows security how to debug a DAST scanner when it doesn't work. Likewise, when talking to developers, if you know security inside and out, and you don't know what developers need and what developers want, it's hard to train that security person into how to talk to developers, because I don't want to say all, but most of the stereotypical ways that security people who don't know development talk to developers, they're just outdated. Like, one of the things that drives me crazy is, oh, well, to prevent SQL injection, you parameterize your SQL queries. That was great advice 20 years ago. Most developers use what are called ORMs now, object relational mappers, which handle most of that work for the developer. The developer just says, okay, here's my object. I click save, and the parameterized queries happen behind the scenes. That memo hasn't gotten to security folks yet, security folks who don't do development. And so they give bad advice. The developers get this bad advice. They don't know what to do with it. They get frustrated with the security team. And that's when things start to go sideways. So if you have a security person who knows development, they know that, okay, I'm not going to give them just generic advice. I'm going to dig into things a little bit and give them more targeted advice. And I think it's a lot easier for somebody who knows some security and software development to look up, oh, there's this security concept that I don't know. Let me just look at that one security concept and explain that to a developer. I think that's easier than to teach a security person who doesn't know software development how to explain to software developers how things work. And those two things combined meant that I thought that a software developer who knows security can come in and pick up the other skills that they needed for the position rather easily because they had the foundational knowledge. I was talking to somebody yesterday about tooling in security, and they were saying that they didn't start with the tool. They started with training the people on the fundamental knowledge. And I think that that is overlooked in the security community, is that a lot of times we like tools to solve problems. And it doesn't really work that way. What you need to do instead is you need to work on the fundamentals. You need to work on the fundamental knowledge. And once you have the fundamental knowledge, you can learn all the skills that you need to in order to do the job. That includes how to use a particular tool. That could include a lot of these other specific things that these companies are asking for. Do you have the fundamental knowledge in order to pick up the specifics of the job? And I think a lot of where companies run into trouble is that they do the opposite. Do you have the specifics? Do you have the day-to-day? Do you know how to do the day-to-day? Well, you might know how to do the day-to-day, but if you don't have the fundamentals, you're not going to be very good at the job.
How do people end up in roles where they know the day-to-day but don't understand the fundamentals? Like, you would think that there would be some sort of pipeline where you would start by learning the fundamentals. And this is why a lot of people say that security is not an entry-level field, because you have to understand the IT building blocks that you're securing before you get into security. But how does somebody just skip, I guess, to that type of role while ignoring or underappreciating or not really grasping the fundamentals?
So staying in the DAST world, there are two ways that I've seen people get into DAST scanning where they don't really know the fundamentals of both security and programming. And it usually comes that they had the fundamentals of one, but not the other. So if a security person comes to DAST scanning, they won't necessarily know how to debug the tool. So DAST scanners work by looking at websites. In order to be able to debug a DAST scanner, you have to be able to understand what exactly the website is telling you. And the easiest way of doing that is having web development experience. But if you're a security person without web development experience, then it's hard for you to debug the tool. And I've seen all sorts of security scans go sideways because you just don't know what's going on. Likewise, if you're a programmer and you don't know security, you don't know what the tool is telling you, because what the tool is telling you and what you need to do about it are very often two different things. And I've seen programmers run scans and then say, oh, well, this is a false positive, or they're misinterpreting this, or they're misunderstanding that, or don't understand that this is a problem. And so they don't use the tool properly. And so then once they start running the tool, they can say, oh, well, I have experience in DAST scanning. because they do. But they don't know, and that's just one of the tough things about probably anything, is that you don't know what you don't know. And are if you run a scan, you get results, you make changes on those results, you might think that you've done a perfectly fine job, when in reality, of the 10 things you needed to do, you were missing 8, but you don't know that because nobody who knew what they were doing has shown you how to do that. And so that's a big reason why it's just difficult to know from somebody's resume. What does that experience really mean? You have experience of task scanning. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think, in the interview process where that may have broken down to where somebody didn't understand that somebody didn't have those fundamentals. Were they just asking, too high level questions? How many years of experience do you have running task scans, or have you worked with this particular scanner? That type of thing. Is that how you think it happens? Like, they're just not digging deep enough in the actual technical interviews, or is it something else?
I think that's a part of it. I think there's also a challenge when the hiring manager doesn't know what they don't know. And if the hiring manager knows, say that desk scanning is important and a desk scanner does this, this, and this, but they don't know the nuances of how the scanners work and what can go wrong, they're not going to ask questions about things that they don't know. So it's tough. It's tough for, say, a security generalist who doesn't know appsec to ask detailed appsec questions. It's tough for a software engineer to ask a project manager how to manage projects. It's tough to ask questions outside of your area of expertise, and if the manager isn't specialized in those particular areas, then it's just tough to know what you don't know, and it's tough to ask questions about those things.
Yeah, and I think especially for smaller companies, they may have, like you said, that security generalist, possibly manager of information security or cybersecurity manager, and then that person's responsible for managing AppSec and IAM and cloud security and GRC. And maybe they came up through one of those verticals, but they don't know all of them. And security, as I always say, is both a mile wide and a mile deep. So you can't possibly know every area of security. So what's the solution then? If you're going to hire somebody that's a specialist like that, and say you're more of a generalist manager, how do you go about making sure you're asking the right questions to understand if somebody understands the fundamentals of something?
I think there are several things you can do, and a lot of it depends on the resources that are available to you. I think one, you as the hiring manager have to understand as many of the fundamentals as you can. I do think that there are a lot of these fundamentals that you can only learn with hands-on experience. So there's only so far that you can get, but having some idea of what you're hiring for beyond the just top surface level, I think, is very important. If you have people on your team who do the job, and again, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know that your team doesn't know, then this becomes difficult. But if people on your team do know what they're doing, as far as getting their input is important. If you can hire an outside consultant to come in and say, this is really what you should be looking for, this isn't what you should be looking for. I'm not sure I've ever seen that. I think I've seen that once. Somebody brought in a consultant to start a new application security program, and then they asked the consultant to hire somebody on full time. I think is the only time I've ever seen a company really having a consultant heavily involved in hiring. But I think that's something that they can do. They can do often, or that they should do. Another thing is, if you have a recruiter who's used to recruiting in those spaces and say that here are some of the questions that they have asked. And then the hiring manager, if they don't understand what those questions are, they can either dig further or have the hiring manager or have the recruiter figure out what they can. And if you have a recruiter who's technical, then you can have a recruiter do a technical screen too.
Yeah, and that is a rare breed to have a truly technical security recruiter. I mean, I've been recruiting in security 9 years now, and I've never been quote unquote technical. I think I do a really good job at the skill sets that I know very well, but a lot of it's just through knowing the types of companies that people work at and what type of work they're doing. So I don't have to dig down into the technical questions as much, because I know that the type of work that they're doing is the same type of work that my client is doing. And a lot of them are consulting firms, the as far as the clients that I've worked with traditionally. So it becomes very obvious when somebody's going to be a fit or not. And then it's just a matter of determining if they have the interest in weaving that story, as we talked about before. I've always thought that there's a gap in the market. Like there's a place, I think, for highly technical recruiters. The challenge you get, though, I think, is that people that are highly technical, they don't always necessarily have the traits that makes a good security recruiter. A lot of which is more, type A personality and that type of thing. More of the soft skill type things. And obviously that's a generalization, and there are exceptions to every rule. But yeah, the more specialist a recruiter you can get to help out with that sort of thing will certainly help.
I do think that one challenge that you'd have with a highly technical recruiter is one of the things that annoys me is somebody in technology. And I think this is true in all the technology fields that I've worked with, not just security, is that there's an emphasis on, getting back to what we were saying earlier, an emphasis on knowing the specific technologies that are required for the job rather than just knowing the fundamentals. And so if I'm a company and I want to hire somebody with experience with a Qualys DAS scanner, my argument would be that you just need to know how DAS scanning works in order to be able to run a Qualys scanner. But what I would see out of, I think, technical folks, and I would see technical recruiters making this mistake too, is that, you're using Qualys. Well, let me ask Qualys specific questions. When, in order to be successful in that role, I would argue you wouldn't need that. You just need getting back to what we were saying earlier, the fundamentals.
Yeah, and you could ask, have you used DAS scanners? Which ones have you used? How have you used them? Not just, have you done these specific things with this specific one? And I see that often on job descriptions too. They'll ask for a specific SIM or IDS or IPS or whatever. It's like, no, if they have a good foundation in technology, they can do any of this stuff. And I'll submit a candidate to a client and say, look, he or she hasn't worked with this specific tool, but has worked with all these other ones. Here's all the other great things about them. Or this person has worked with this particular tool, say, for 1 year, but they're really, really sharp. And I guarantee they're going to outperform a lot of people that have been working with that tool for 5 years. But the pushback will be then, well, they don't have 5 years of experience using this specific tool. It's like, like they can clearly do this job. I can tell just by talking to them. And sometimes it can be difficult, I think, to, again, weave that story about why you think they're a fit for that role, despite the fact that they don't have on paper whatever is, in the job description. I suppose another way, when you're that hiring manager and you don't know what you don't know, and you're hiring for a specific, maybe highly technical role, and you got to understand if somebody has the foundational knowledge. Something else you could do, we could go on a tangent here, is ask your network. I think that's a way underutilized asset. People feel like they have to figure this out all on their own, but if you know people in application security and that's not your specialty, mean, there's so many Discord channels and places out there that are specialist hubs basically for people that know this stuff on a really deep level. It's a way too, I think, to keep your knowledge sharp, even if you're not in one of those specific disciplines as, say, a generalist or a manager or something like that.
Yeah, that's something that I hadn't really thought of, but yeah, I agree completely. I do want to come back to one thing that you said. The manager's looking for 5 years of experience with that particular tool. That one of my pet peeves with the hiring market is, so you are hiring that person with 5 years of experience with that particular tool. My question for them is, why do they want your job? Why would they want to do what they've already been doing for 5 years? Why would they want to do that for you? And I think that that's something that a lot of hiring managers need to spend more time thinking about, is what makes this job attractive? And one way to make a job attractive is to hire somebody who that's a step up for them. Okay, here's something new. Here's something different. You're doing something related. Here's something you can build on the skills that you already have. And in the mentality of, we're going to hire somebody who has 5 years of experience in that, well, where's the growth opportunity there? Where's the interest? Where's the spark? Where's the why would I do that? And then that's when you're looking at other. So are you going to pay a higher salary, or do you really have benefits that are really truly out of this world? What's attracting candidates to that job?
Yeah, and again, that's where working with a really good recruiter can help you understand what candidates on the market may be looking for in their next move. Say they are passive and they have no reason to look for a new job. What is it that for this particular skill set is a common theme for folks that want to move on? Maybe they're not being challenged enough. Maybe it's more salary. Maybe it's benefits. Maybe it's they're way overworked and they just want to get some time back with their family. That's a really common one. Or their company's pushing to in office and this one's remote. Like, that's such a huge draw for so many people. But unless you've talked to those candidates, you don't really understand what their motivators might be. And so that's where, working with that specialist can certainly help. But yeah, I totally agree. You have to have something that stands out as interesting. And one of the best ways to do that is to give somebody a move either horizontally in their career, where they're doing some sort of cross training or something, a new skill set that they're learning, especially for people that are, intellectually curious and really motivated. They always want to get their hands on something else, in a new challenge. So you can do that, or you can provide them, like you said, a step up where maybe it's a title increase. Maybe it's just a responsibility increase. Maybe it's an increase in pay. Basically, in my experience, people do not want to take what they view as a step back or a lateral move in almost any case. And it depends on what that person's motivator is. Like, to them, a step back could be, I'm working more hours, or it's not necessarily the pay or the title. To them, a step back could be, just doing the same old thing when they want to do something new and interesting. So there's no shortcut, I think, to talking to people and sussing out what these motivators are. But the challenge, I think, in this market is, as we discussed before, you get hundreds or thousands of applicants to each job that you post. And obviously you've been on the candidate side of this, and some folks as well that have been through the job search, I guess, recently in this crazy market that we're in. Any thoughts on what hiring managers can do to sift through all the noise and, hire the best people when there's so many people just not hearing anything back these days?
That's a good question, especially since I saw one recruiter complaining that they had an account executive job, so basically a sales job. They had 3,600 applicants, and I forget how many. I think it was over 3,000 were accountants, not even salespeople. So it wasn't even that of the 3,600 resumes, most of them were not qualified. It was out of the 3,600 resumes, most of them had nothing nothing to do with the actual job. And the short answer to that is, well, those people are easy to weed out. But on the other hand, there's still time involved in taking a look at their resumes. I outside of looking for doing things like looking for referrals and just doing maybe doing a quick 3-second, is this person worth more time? I don't know, because that's just a hard problem to have, is that somebody has to look at all those resumes, and somebody has to look at all those applicants. So you could outsource it. It'd be one answer. But beyond that, no, I don't really have any great ideas.
Yeah, I can tell you from the recruiting frame of reference that if a company is getting that many applicants per job, and say they have an internal recruiting team, and each of those internal recruiters has 5 or 10 or possibly even 20 jobs to fill, and each job application has 1,000 or more applicants, the amount of time that it'll take to get through those thousands upon thousands upon thousands of applicants, I mean, even if recruiters are only spending a few seconds on each resume and quickly weeding folks out, it's all a very manual process. And I think people have this idea that AI is out there auto-rejecting people, which, as far as I've been able to tell, just does not happen. There are ranking systems for some ATSs, applicant tracking systems, but the most they can do is rank. They don't auto-reject. Unless you have, I think one way to cut down on it would be put in those basically weeding people out questions where, do you have a degree? Yes or no. And then if you say no, then, it auto rejects you. That's one way to cut down on the applications. But I think the best solution is just stop posting jobs. Job sites, they get paid for the job posting. They don't care what your results are, really, how many applicants you get or what that does to your operational efficiency. All they care is you're paying for the job posting. And as long as you're getting a bunch of applicants, they can say that their platform works. But in reality, it's creating more problems than it solves. I think if every recruiting team were to focus on outbound, sit down with the hiring manager at the very beginning of a search for a new person, spend an hour just talking about the ideal fit, intangibles, all these little things, understanding terminology, educating the recruiter. Spend that hour up front, then have them get some sort of resume database. And security, really, LinkedIn is the best place. I wouldn't use Career Builder or anything like that. Have them go and search for people, and only have them message the people that look like they're a fit based on the requirements that you lay out and discuss with that recruiter. If you were to do that, they would only spend time reaching out to the people that are most likely to be a fit. And if they did that for every job, they would immensely reduce all of the noise out there, basically, where you're getting people that are they're not in the same ballpark, they're not playing the same sport, to quote Pulp Fiction. So I think that's a lot of the issue. It's just this noise that's happening because the applicants are not being choosy enough about what they apply to, and the hiring teams aren't being specific or narrowing down their requirements enough to where everybody's like, well, nobody's going to meet that. I'm just going to shoot my shot anyway. So ironically, I think the more requirements you have, the more people apply. I'd like to see some data on that. Maybe not. But if you can't really narrow it down to a small pool of, if you can't narrow down your requirements to like 5, maybe you're just going to get people applying anyway. You're only going to get people that are just shooting your shot, and you're not going to get the people that actually could be a fit, interestingly enough, I think. So that's just one theory.
And from the candidate side, the more you get rejected without an explanation, the more you're just going to get desperate and apply to whatever looks even remotely close. So it does seem to be a problem that's snowballing, and it is making itself worse.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where People blame it on technology. I don't think it's so much a technology problem. I think it's more of a people and a process problem, not really understanding what the problem is. I think in the hiring managers I've talked to and job seekers, nobody really understands how us recruiters work and like what it's like to spend all day going through thousands of applicants or thousands of LinkedIn profiles. Like it's mind-numbing work, and inevitably you're going to miss something. And I think a lot of hiring managers don't realize how poorly trained recruiters are, how stressed they are. There just seems to be this disconnect, I think, between the hiring teams, the subject matter experts, and the recruiters. And obviously, my hope with this podcast is we can bridge a little bit of that, because I think there's a lot of frustrated job seekers out there right now, and a lot of frustrated hiring managers, for that matter. Any other tips? Well, I guess as far as we kind of talked about the job seeking process, what it's like from the candidate side, what hiring managers can do. What about retention? Any thoughts on best way to keep good people around?
I think that a lot of it is going to depend on the individual candidate. Find out what ticks for them, and do your best to meet those needs. For me, it's challenge. A lot of companies just tend to, oh, you're good at this thing, so we're going to keep having you do that thing. And that is pretty much the opposite of what I need. I need to have new challenges, new things, learn new things. Some candidates, it is money. And then make sure that they get raises if it's appropriate. I think it is a candidate by candidate thing. What I hear a lot of companies doing is trying to build culture for the company, and we're an awesome company, people love working for us, yay. I have seen that work, but I do think it's more about the manager keeping the individual happy, working with the individual, making sure that they feel valued, making sure that their work has meaning to either the group or the company or whatever's possible given the size of the company, and making sure that they are valued salary wise, recognition wise, and making sure that they have growth opportunities.
Yeah, and I think the retention really needs to start in the beginning too. We talked about motivators previously. If your recruiter is good and or your hiring team is good, and they understand in the beginning, okay, this person is motivated by flexibility more than anything else, or maybe they are money motivated. We need to build in some sort of bonus structure, or really drive home the fact that they can get referrals for employees or new clients, that sort of thing. If you really understand somebody's motivators going into the employer-employee relationship, you can make that a part of goal setting, for instance, for quarterly check-ins or reviews, that sort of thing. But I totally agree. It's very much about the individual. And you may have a big difference in personalities among the different people on your team. One person may be motivated by public recognition. The other person might be an introvert. And that's the last thing they want, is to have you stand up in a meeting and recognize their name and have them stand up and all that good stuff. And that's actually come up in previous episodes as well. So completely agree. It's an individual thing, and it can be tricky building, I think, a cohesive team and company culture when you have all these disparate individuals that all have their different reasons for getting out of bed in the morning and stuff like that. But I think the more you pay attention to it, the better chances you have, and you can have people with a variety of stuff.
Yeah. And I think that one overlooked aspect of retention is making sure that you're hiring the right people in the first place. So one of the dangers to hiring somebody who's already done the job for 5 years and is motivated by doing something new and different, is that they're going to get pretty bored with the position pretty quickly. Or if they're money motivated and you give them a slight bump in pay, they're going to be pretty disappointed pretty quickly. So making sure that whatever whatever caused them to, making sure that you can provide when you hire them. Not only can they do the job, but do they really want the job? And if they really want the job, why is that? And how can we grow, even grow from day one?
Yeah, and what's truly unique about your company and this team that's going to match with that person's motivators, not just today to get them on board, but also to keep them sticking around. Like you said, if somebody is always looking for a challenge and you know that you have a really static environment, say you're in a huge corporation and relatively stable, mature security posture, and this person's always looking for something new, you may get them on board for a little more money in the short term, but what's going to happen in 6 or 12 months when, there's a startup offering a new position with, new interesting stuff to do? I think the tendency is to hire kind of reactively and just fill the seat, it can be so tempting to fall into that. I think it is a trap. But I think a lot of companies and hiring teams fall into that out of necessity because somebody quits and all of a sudden, they didn't know that person was going to quit. They have a spot to fill and they need it filled yesterday, or else the company's security posture is going to suffer. So no real solution to that one, I suppose, other than being as proactive as you can.
Or maybe hiring a contractor to fill the seat immediately and then looking for a longer term fit, taking more time to find the longer fit. Well, the longer term fit.
Yeah, or outsourcing, as we had discussed before, as sort of a stopgap measure. Well, we're coming up on time here, Scott. So just one last question for you. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think for me, it comes back to fundamentals. Getting back to what we talked about earlier, is how do we make sure that the people that we're hiring have the fundamentals to do the job? Not just, do you have 5 years experience with this tool? Do you have 5 years experience doing this? But do you have the fundamental knowledge to be able to take the next step? Do you have the fundamental knowledge to grow? Or if you're a very senior level person, do you have the soft skills to go into management if that's what you're interested in? It's going back to let's get away from the check boxes, but how do we ask questions about the fundamentals? How do we teach the fundamentals? How do we make sure that everyone is filling gaps in knowledge of the fundamentals if they have them? I don't see a lot of folks talking about that.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess we talk obviously a lot about entry level, if it can be a real thing or not in security. I think there's a lot of folks that would listen to this and be like, okay, that sounds great. I know we all need to understand the fundamentals of technology to be in security. Do you believe that those fundamentals can be developed in either a classroom or lab setting or in a hobbyist sense or through self-study? Or do you believe that, I guess, people really need to have worked in IT for a couple of years before getting into a security role? And I guess we'll close on that.
I think it depends on the skill. I think that, and I think it has to be a mixture of both too. Depending on the specific skill, might be more book study, or it might be more experience. But I think starting with book study and then getting that experience to starting with book study, so you have some place to start. If you have the opportunity to experiment with build something or do something on your own, so you can figure out just the fundamentals, do that, and then start getting your feet wet doing things in a real environment, I think is the way to, it's the best way of doing that.
Yeah, and I think most folks in security would agree that time in seat, hands-on experience in a professional setting doing technology work, that's really the ideal. But it's good to hear that you would say that folks can kind of start doing other things, develop some baseline level of knowledge, and then from there, kind of move into that more professional technical role, and then, hopefully eventually security. That's a great place to end. Appreciate your time, Scott. If people want to find you, keep up with the work that you do, what's the best way to do so?
I'm on LinkedIn, so linkedin.com/Scott Norberg, SCOTTNORBERG, or opperis.com, OPPERIS.com.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. Appreciate your time, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.